Hi, everybody, and welcome back. This is now our third video in the psychotherapy series. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Adlerian psychotherapy. And many people link Alfred Adler to Sigmund Freud as one of his students, which it's not entirely correct, as we're going to see as we go through it. But, you know, he revolutionized psychotherapy and gets a really nice endorsement from Albert Ellis, which I'm going to share that quote at the end of today's lesson. But let's get started, and I want to make sure that we get a beautiful flavor of who Alfred Adler was and what his theory was, and some of the therapeutic interventions. Okay, so when we think of Alfred Adler, the term individual psychology is going to come up. So individual psychology is not doing therapy with one person versus group therapy. Individual psychology, as we will see, comes from a Latin word individuum, which really means indivisible, meaning whereas Freud tried to break a person up into the id, ego, superego, and many philosophers tried to understand the mind-body connection like Descartes and dualism, Alfred Adler said, no, we have to study the whole person as a composite. We cannot break them up into more elementary parts. We study you as a whole. All right. So, as I said, today we're going to be focusing on Adlerian therapy, individual psychology, which is an approach that was developed by Alfred Adler. Adler's theory and approach predate many of the contemporary models we have. And as I said, he was influential to many of these models. He really helped ego psychology, cognitive psychology, existential psychology, and so forth with his work. Now, I do want you to know, and I've emphasized this even in my intro to the slides, that Adler was more of a contemporary rather than a disciple of Freud. He becomes connected with Freud because of Adler defending some of Freud's work. But during their day, in many cases, some of the work of Adler was more popular. Now, when we think of psychotherapy, we tend to refer to Sigmund Freud as the father of psychotherapy. But in reality, I think that their ideas, should be treated as co-founders of psychotherapy. And Adler was, in many circles, more popular than Freud. So how did he overlap? How did he develop these ideas that we find so valuable and priceless to modern psychotherapy? Well, in his day, he overlapped in time with Freud, but he seemed to be more progressive and ahead of his time, right? So he was viewed by many as a man of the future who just happened to be dropped into Freud's inner circle in Vienna. But he was far more progressive. Now, individual psychology, as I said earlier, was a term that Adler used to describe his therapeutic approach. And it came from Latin individuum, which means indivisible. You can't divide a person into parts. Rather, we study the holistic holistic person, the person as a composite. We don't break them up into id, ego, and superego as Freud would have. Now, Adlerian therapy tends to be psychoeducational. As we said before, psychoeducation is a process of teaching a person, almost like a professor would teach a student. We teach our client about themselves, their condition, and how to grow. The focus tends to be more in the present to the future. That isn't to say that Adler doesn't focus on your upbringing. He does think about parenting, and we're going to talk about birth order. Interesting to note, he overstated the value of birth order, but your birth order and your childhood experience as you're raised matter. And he tends to be more of a brief approach. He's not looking to keep you in therapy for 5, 6, 7 years. So part of the model requires insight. An insight-oriented approach helps you raise your awareness about your condition and helps you feel more empowered to make choices. So, despite the ubiquitous nature of Adler's ideas, many people don't give Adler the credit he deserved. And he really, as I listed, he really influenced cognitive behavioral therapy. He influenced existential therapies, some of the early spiritual models. I can go on and on and on about what he did to contribute to modern counseling and psychotherapy, but most people don't even recognize him and appreciate his value as much as they should. Now, so the question becomes, how did he formulate some of his ideas? And his ideas were distinctly revolutionary in his times, and they did not match with a lot of what Freud said. Well, was it the fact that he worked with working class individuals as opposed to Freud working with wealthy? Was it the fact that he was an early feminist, right? And he supported feminist ideas in a time where there was the male superiority myth? Or was it because his ideas were like common sense, right? So people might have ignored him because of a lot of these things in his day. And obviously his ideas were less sexy, and that's in quotes, to Freud, because as you know, Freud had the theory of psychosexual development. So there are a lot of reasons why he may not get the credit that he deserved. But, today we acknowledge him, and I'm acknowledging him. Now, I want to state and highlight one of the ideas, right? So his contributions continue to persist today. So if we look at, this is direct quote from Adler's work. In a word, I am convinced that a person's behavior springs from his or her idea. As a matter of fact, it has the same effect on whether a poisonous snake is actually approaching my foot or whether I merely believe it is a poisonous snake. Now, why is this quote important? Because there are people like Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck who talked about how one's thoughts and emotions drive their behavior. We're going to learn all about cognitive and cognitive behavioral approaches to therapy as we move forward. But Alfred Adler, who's known for individual psychology, you could see that he understood that your thoughts impact your behavior. It doesn't happen behavior is not spontaneous or random. It's somewhat not fully determined, but somewhat determined by our thoughts. Now, to give you his history, Alfred Adler was very, very sick as a child. He was in and out of the hospital. He was accident prone. He missed a lot of schooling, and he had a lot of medical issues. So I tell you this because we're going to talk about organ inferiority and the masculine protests and strivings for superiority. These are all themes that talk about going from a position of weakness to strength, from lack of competency to competency, right? And one of the things that's interesting about Freud, Adler, and many of those individuals who get bundled up in the psychodynamic principles is that their theories were often governed by their experiences in life. So because Adler had so much illness, it's not shocking that he would talk about the fact that everybody is born with some organ inferiority, right? All right. Now, we talked about Freud and we talked about the Oedipus complex and how a male child has an attraction to their mother and is rivalrous towards their father. And Freud took that position based on his experience with his own mother and father. His mother was nurturing. His mother created a sense of favoritism towards him. His dad was cold and dismissive. So there was this strife between him and his dad. So it shouldn't shock you that Freud put an emphasis on the mother-son connection. Well, interesting to note, Adler didn't have the same experience. Adler was more encouraged rather than criticized by his father. His father was a Hungarian Jew who was always building his son up and trying to highlight his son's inherent worth. Now, or when we talk about a person's inherent or innate worth, which you're going to hear Adler talk about, that has a profound influence on the ideas of people like Carl Rogers and unconditional positive regard. We love you for who you are, as you are, with no strings attached. You don't need to behave or perform a certain way to get my respect. So there is a difference in viewpoint based on how Adler and Freud were raised. We also see that Adler married an early socialist and feminist. So it's possible, and we don't know whether Adler brought these feminist ideas into the marriage or whether he was influenced by Raisa Epstein. And we don't know which one happened first, truth be told, but certainly it was a good connection and there was synergy between the two. Now, how did Adler enter Freud's inner circle? Well, Adler defended Freud's interpretation of dreams, right? So as a function of that, in 1902, Freud invites him to the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, which Freud was having in his house weekly. Ultimately, that's how he comes into Freud's orbit. But I said he was already an expert in his own right. But to highlight that, he wrote a book called The Health Book for the Tailor's Trade, and that's in 1898, which is before he was in Freud's orbit, talking about his approach to working with individuals of lower socioeconomic status and whatnot, which was very different than Freud's, his population that he treated. Now, in 1911, Adler made the mistake, dun, 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 the unthinkable of introducing the concept of the masculine protest at a group's meeting. And the masculine protest, as part of it, Adler talked about that women occupied less privileged social and political position, not due to biology or organ inferiority or physical inferiority, but due to social conditions, due to social coercion. And this was one of the lines of demarcation where Adler said, no, I don't believe you, Freud, in this male superiority myth. It's really how society treats women that puts them in a more submissive or inferior position. And he talks about the masculine protest, but the masculine protest is not exclusive to men. It's wanting to strive to be better and strive towards fighting against one's limitations, right? And both males and females can experience that. So Freud was obviously not happy. And then there were several other areas of difference between Freud and Adler. So eventually, Adler and a few colleagues break off and they leave Freud and the Psychoanalytic Society in Vienna, and they form what at that time was called the Society for Free Psychoanalytic Research, right? So now eventually this becomes the Society for Individual Psychology, which we still have today. But Adler was trying to create space for more divergence. Now it's interesting when we talk about Carl Jung. Now, Carl Jung also went from prized pupil, and he did study under Freud, to outcast. And one of the reasons why Carl Jung was sort of outcast was because he differed on the levels of the unconscious. And Carl Jung introduced this concept called the collective unconscious. So it didn't seem like Freud created much space for people to diverge from his ideas. So a lot of people were kicked out of the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society or left, right? So Adler breaks off, he creates this Society for Individual Psychology, and he starts to really shift the focus of psychoanalysis. And here's a quote that highlights that. Their response to human problems was characteristically ethical and practical, an orientation that stood in dramatic contrast to the biological and theoretical focus of psychoanalysis. So this is the view of Adler and his Society for Free Psychoanalytic Research. They really tried to break away from Freud's dogma and see things from another point of view. So, as I said, Adler, believed in holism. So that's a sense of unity of thinking, feeling, attitudes, conscious and unconscious mind, and so forth. So breaking people up into separate parts or elemental parts was not Adler's game. So this is another thing that puts him in distinction or separate from Freud's ideas. He also believed that behavior was purposeful. So human choice and purpose influences their behavior. Now, this is an additional push against Freud, who believed that we were just a bundle of drives, and there was psychical determinism. So our drives influence us in a complete way, and there was no free will. So human choice matters here. Now, I will say this doesn't mean that Adler didn't feel that and somehow your behavior was determined, but he didn't feel it was completely determined. So human choice and purpose influence your choice. All right. So let's put this into practice, right? So Dreikers was one of Adler's students. And he wrote a lot about the family. He wrote a lot about parenting and so forth. So Rudolf Dreikers tried to explain, why do children misbehave? And he said that there are 4 goals for children's misbehavior. And it's interesting that misbehavior was goal-oriented too. So in some ways, it might be to get attention if they feel that they're not getting sufficient attention. Might be to demonstrate some sense of power or control. It might be revenge on a base level. It could be to display some sense of inadequacy. All of these show a factor that behavior is motivated and behavior is purposeful. So even children's misbehavior is purposeful, right? Those 4 conditions. Now, another theoretical principle that's important to Adler, and I'm going to butcher it because I'm not German, so please forgive me if I mispronounce it. It's Gemeinschaftsgefühl, right? Which is basically social and community feeling, which is a fancy way of saying you can't purely be self-oriented. You have to be connected with society and social relationships. Those people who are overly focused on the self to the exclusion of social relationships actually tend to be unhealthy. So the focus of therapy, or one of the foci of therapy is to maintain healthy relationships, because we're a social animal. We all are naturally interdependent. We need one another. You know, when we think of part of the breakdown of mental health due to the recent coronavirus, part of it is due to the breakdown in social relationships. We couldn't connect with one another, so it should not shock that mental health concerns spiked as a function of that. He also found that you want to focus on health rather than pathology. So things like empathy, being able to put yourself in another person's shoes, and altruism, doing things just because they're right, were important parts of the social condition. Now, what does research say? Well, research suggests that this idea of social interest and community feeling is positively linked to spirituality, attachment, and many positive psychology factors, right? So social interest, community feeling is a good thing. Now, striving for superiority, as we say it in many of our lectures, is really an oversimplification of another term that's German, Vollkommenheit, right, or completeness, but it's really described as excellence. So it's interesting that a lot of the writings, when they're translated, we try and approximate the concept, right? So striving for superiority or striving for excellence, we all have areas of inferiority or deficiency, but we want to take our areas of inferiority and become more competent, right? It's all about competency or excellence in an area, right? So As I said, though, we all should aim to better ourselves and become more competent in areas of potential weakness. But if you put too much emphasis on self-interest, that becomes pathological and can be a source of mental illness or a need for therapy, right? So, yes, aim for excellence, but not to the exclusion of your friends and family. Now, phenomenology is the understanding that the subjective reality is reality. What does that mean? That my experience and your experience of something can be very different. But even though we disagree in what happened or what we experienced, they both can be true. So phenomenology is part of Adler's theory, and humanistic and existential theorists have this as part of it. So we construct our own reality, and that's important to understand, that we construct our own reality, and how we construct this reality influences who we are. Now, based on a phenomenological view, everybody is different. So Adler focused more on what's called an idiographic perspective, which is studying the uniqueness of the individual rather than group experience, right? So he wrote in 1935, a human cannot be typified or classified. So he wanted to study you as a unique individual. And that's in contrast to many trait theorists who take on a nomothetic approach, which is basically to look for group norms in behavior. So remember what we said, though. You have some sense of free will, more free will than Freud acknowledged, right? So Adler is more of a soft determinism, which means behavior is driven or influenced, but it's influenced not by a singular factor. It's influenced by many interacting factors, right? It's very dynamic. So we can't say it's basically your drives, as Freud would say, or as Skinner would say, a whole bunch of stimuli, right? So it's more complex. He acknowledges it's complex. I'm sure he would say it's driven to some degree or influenced by to some degree, but you still have free will. So let's talk about style of life or lifestyle. So this is your way of relating or interacting with the world, yourself, and your future. Now, remember this because we have something called the cognitive triad, right? And Beck talked about this as 3 factors that influence the development of depression or mental illness: a negative view of the world, self, or your future. Well, it turns out that Adler had these concepts in his theory well before Aaron Beck. Now, the only difference is Adler focused on more of the positive view of the world, positive view of the self and the future, right? So Adler believed that we create our own world and we live by the rules that we create. And this is what he calls fictional finalism, or what he later refers to as the guiding self-ideal. So our future goals impact our current behavior, right? And our current behavior influences our goals, right? So, so ultimately, we write a narrative for where we want to be, and then our actions are influenced by that. So later, he changed the term from fictional finalism to guiding self-ideal to talk about one's inherent nature, to look for a desirable future. So this is one of Adler's personality anecdotes, right? So 3 children are taken to the zoo for the first time, and they look or stare at or they stand in front of the lion's cage, right? So one of the children shrank behind their mother's skirts and said, I want to go home. The second child stood where he was, very pale, and trembled and said, I'm not a bit frightened. The third glared at the lion and fiercely asked his mother, shall I spit at it? It's interesting, right? Each child felt inferior to some degree, but based on their style of life, they responded differently, right? So this is what he was trying to say, is that how you view the world is going to influence the narrative you write and the actions that emerge from it. So lifestyle types, right? So this is an inner working model. He came up with 5 lifestyle types. It's interesting that he wasn't interested in typology, but he still came up with 8 lifestyle types. It's something for us to think about. So there's a ruling type who's influenced by a sense of control and power. There is a getting type who is interested in receiving, right? Avoiding type, which is stepping away. Driving type is approaching. Controlling type, wanting to have control. Victimized type is the flip side, being good and being socially approved of. And then there's the socially useful type. We all should aim to be the socially useful type, which is a healthy, functional individual. Now, our style of life, as you can see, can be adaptive, it can be maladaptive, and it can be somewhere in between. Right? Everything is spectrum based. And even if you think about those children at the zoo and that anecdote, none of those solutions really solve their fear or their inadequacy. So when we talk about our beliefs about the self, the world, and others, if they are based on cognitive errors, they can cause psychological pain and distress to both ourselves and other people, right? So Adler referred to these errors as basic mistakes. And the goal of therapy in this case would be to identify these cognitive mistakes and modify or replace them. So we have 6 tasks of life. Now, in all fairness, Dreikers adds 2 of the 6, but they're still linked to Adler. So the 6 life tasks are work, social relationships, love, self, spirituality, and parenting and family. So let's go through them. Work and occupation, Adler believed, were solved by the second test, which is social relationship or friendship and feeling connected and cooperating. So there is a need to belong, right? So because he believed humans are interdependent, right? We have a need to belong. We don't want to feel excluded, right? So this second idea of needing to belong and friendships and cooperation help and actually manifest in the workplace. Now, love and marriage. Adler felt marriage was a partnership. And if there is intimate devotion between neither partner, it can feel subdued, nor it cannot be subdued or overshadowed, right? So if you are equally committed, he's saying that there's nothing that can come in the way of it or overshadow it. Now, it's interesting that he linked love and marriage, but that is connected to a social time period, the zeitgeist, right? Now you can have love without marriage. All right, so the task of the self, right? So it's your relationship with yourself during childhood, right? So you can have the survival of the self, which is, are you taking care of yourself? Body image, your view of the self. And Adler struggled with body image. And is my body image congruent with my body? My opinion of myself, what's my opinion of myself, like about a given issue, and then our overall evaluation, am I a good person or a bad person? So that's the task of the self. Task of spirituality is your relationship to God. Do I believe in God? If so, what kind of God do I believe in? A merciful God, a critical God, so forth. Religion in general, do I embrace religious beliefs? Do I avoid them? What is my connection to the universe? What's the meaning of life? So a lot of this existential stuff. Then you have parenting and family, so giving birth and raising children impact it's an extension of our love and marriage task, but it affects us, right? So being a parent comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility because we can influence our children and their personality. So be careful, right? So Dreikers, this is one of his major claims to fame, was his work on parenting. So there are different kinds of parenting, and then obviously here are kind of goals, how you should be, and then we'll talk about the other stuff. So Adler and Dreikers' parent approach, they thought you should be democratic but authoritative, which means that you seek the perspective of your children, you dialogue with them, but you hold them accountable. You don't want to be too autocratic or authoritarian where you're just very rigid and cold. You don't want to be too permissive where you show a lot of love but no real consequence to misbehavior, right? So you want to be democratic and authoritative because there would be love, but there would also be consequences. You want to be responsive to the children's needs, but also set firm boundaries, right? You want to be respectful in teaching children problem solving and dealing with adversity. You want to encourage your children rather than praise them, rather than saying, oh, my child is amazing. You could say, oh, you can do this, I believe in it, right? So focusing more on the process rather than the product. Parents should get curious, not furious. So anger is a poison, and punishment should be avoided as much as possible because it doesn't teach children what they're supposed to be doing. All right. So Adler defines psychopathology and the mechanism of psychotherapeutic change in 2 words: discouragement, and you could break that into 3 parts, versus encouragement, right? So discouragement, he believed, is a source of inferiority, source of frustration, is the root of psychopathology. Well, what is discouragement, right? It's a lack of courage to face life's tasks, right? So that is to be contrasted with encouragement. Now, if you had a person in therapy, not just a child, encouragement would be the process by which you focus on an individual and try and build their confidence up and try and build sense of feelings of being worthwhile. What that does is provides the courage that they lacked to face life's tasks, right? So it includes the therapist showing interest and faith in the client's positive qualities, showing a you can do it approach, right? And in every step of treatment, Adler said we must not deviate from the path of encouragement. right? So that discouragement is the source of pathology, encouragement is the source of treatment. Now, that's an oversimplification, of course, because there are stages of therapy, and we're going to go through the 4 stages of therapy. Stage 1, you need to develop a therapeutic relationship. So you need to align their goals and find positive attributes and offer initial interpretation. Then we'll go through some of the lifestyle assessment, later interpretation and reorientation. So the therapeutic relationship should be egalitarian. It should be equal. There is, unlike Freud, who really emphasized this one-dimensional approach, which maximizes power differentials between the therapist and the patient, Adler wanted to take a more egalitarian or equal approach. And he characterized this by listening and showing empathy and caring. In a sense, the therapist can be treated like a friendly teacher or an encouraging business consultant, right? So notice there's a shift, right? So Freud wanted you to reflect back what you were feeling and not get caught in the middle. So their clients are encouraged to be active participants, and it's a collaborative process. And ultimately, the belief was that healthy therapy occurs when you have a positive, friendly, collaborative alliance. So if you can accomplish a therapeutic alliance, now we can shift to the family constellation interview. Give me 1 second. A family constellation interview, you might hear it written as a genogram, where you map out the family and their conditions. But he also focused on birth order, because Adler felt that your birth order influenced your personality to a great degree. So, the interview would ask about your childhood experience, and he wanted to know how one family member interacted with one another, how each family member was viewed by the other, if there was conflict, who was fighting with who didn't fight, and much more. Now, it's interesting. Adler was not a fighter. He was more of a graceful figure. He was more collaborative. So he wanted to know how you reconcile conflict too. So understanding the family is important. Now, we agree with that. Understanding the family is important. We don't agree with his theory of birth order as much. Now, another lifestyle assessment would be the question, which is something we ask in one form or another, but we ask this question: how would your life be different if you were well, right? So how would things be different? Another way to say it is, what would you be doing in your life if you no longer had these symptoms or challenges? So asking the question, and I ask it in the form of a magic wand question, but it kind of sets the course of therapy. It almost becomes the goals for treatment, right? So it's very clear about what you're trying to solve, what you're helping them address, what they've been avoiding addressing, and so forth, right? And then we could also talk about early recollections, right? So, which is more of a projective technique to help understand the child's guiding self-ideal and any kind of basic mistakes that they might have had. So what are basic mistakes? These are any form of maladaptive functioning in an individual style of life, right? So there are cognitive patterns or belief about the world, oneself, or others that result in emotional pain. So here are 5 examples of basic mistakes. Now, he would not call them basic mistakes in a judgmental way, but it's kind of like errors in thought that result in maladaptive behavior and emotional suffering. So one of which is what we call an overgeneralization. Statements like, there's no fairness in the world, So having a negative view of the world, or I'm always going to be the one who has to take care of everything. So a negative view of the future, right? So these are all going to cause emotional pain. Another basic mistake is to set false or impossible goals. Perfectionism is a problem. Don't let perfect be the enemy of that which is good. I think that this is what they're saying. So I need the approval of my boss. My needs need to be met by other people. Things like these. These are all senses of perfectionism or impossible goals. You're going to become despondent if you set impossible goals. So false beliefs about the world, false beliefs about your life and life's demand. So here are two. The world is against me. Thinking that the world is against you is not going to help you. It's going to make you not even try to better your situation. Also, the world is my oyster, which means that you could do anything you want. That's also a mistake, right? So any of these. Denial of one's basic worth. I'm totally worthless. I'm unlovable. No one could ever love me. These kind of negative views is also going to result in problems. And faulty values. I must always come out on top, no matter how much it hurts other people. This, you see people are always like the need to be right. This is a mistake, right? So it's a basic mistake, and it interferes with your ability to be socially connected, doesn't it? So all of these are cognitive errors, which, interesting, this is precognitive psychology, but they impact how you relate to the world. So we identify them, we start to try and increase awareness about some of these false beliefs and how they're influencing your life, right? So now we're going to start to do some meaningful interpretation, confrontation, and re-education. I hate to use the word education, but it's a re-education, reteaching what things could be, right? So Adler felt that your motivation, your insight, all is important to changing your behavior. So let's talk about some action-oriented therapy techniques. So one is to help someone develop a future autobiography. And this can occur through writing, write your story, right? Write who you want to be. And you might want to encourage the person to write the story who you want to be in the most ideal sense. Because when you have people who default to the negative, their future autobiography could be impacted. So getting them to shape their future in a positive way can actually help them get more positive outcomes. Drawing, right? Especially with children, drawing and telling a story with that way, or storytelling, is useful. All right. Acting as if, or reflecting as if. So you might hear this as fake it till you make it. So the idea of, acting as if you possess the trait while you're still acquiring it, right? So that's important. And the push button technique sort of is teaching the client that how you think influences your behavior. So it's sort of a direct connection between your thoughts and your actions. So if you think negatively, you're going to have negative choices or negative outcomes. If you think positively, you're going to do behaviors that could result in more positive outcomes. It's sort of like you push a button, you get a given outcome. So your cognitions or thoughts influence your behavior. Spitting in a client's soup. Now, this is confrontation, where you are using a technique to kind of draw attention and check or challenge a maladaptive strategy. So when you challenge a maladaptive strategy, hence the term spitting in a client's soup, it can cause a reaction, a strong emotional reaction. But the strategy is that when you do that, we believe that that's going to result in the client being less likely to use that maladaptive strategy. So challenging it, confronting it is going to be useful in not allowing them to engage in maladaptive behaviors. We also help create new images which are more adaptive, so new schemas or views of the self. And then we encourage the client to catch oneself. Instead of me challenging you, you can say, hey, there I am. I'm going back in an unhelpful, maladaptive, negative way of thinking or action. So many times we believe that this is a precursor to like thought stopping or self-monitoring. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm doing it again. The more you can do that, the more growth you're going to get, because it maintains the therapeutic relationship. And, you know, you can engage in this process outside of therapy. So that's a technique that you could use 24/7. Task setting and indirect suggestion. So when people are depressed, sometimes you have to tell them exactly what to do. And in therapy, we try and use insight and help you come to what you want to do on your own. But sometimes people are so depressed, they need to be told exactly what to do. Now, paradoxical strategies or prescribing the symptom is kind of encouraging with design. It's not, you wouldn't do this and leave it alone, but you encourage someone who is doing a negative behavior to do that negative behavior and see what they're doing. So it's drawing attention to the negative behavior that they do. So an example might be, if you have an overly critical patient, getting them to try self-criticizing at a higher intensity. Now you might say, well, why would you do that? Well, because we're hoping for insight that, hey, this doesn't work, it's hurtful. So it, if the insight happens, you could change your approach, right? People are gonna say, nah, I don't like that, because we operate based on seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. So it's empirically supported, but it comes with risk. Now, you could also give advice, suggestion, or direction in a positive or cheeky or casual sense. So I'll bet you $5 that you can't do this, right? Something like that to get a person to do an action or give them direction. Now, play therapy, again, because we're trying to get children to grow, play therapy is used to apply Adlerian therapy to children. All right. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to show you the Summers Flanagan video on Adlerian therapy, and then we're going to react to it afterwards. So let me stop recording for a second, and I'm going to pull that up.
This session is an example of using an Adlerian approach. John's working with a 10-year-old boy named Clayton.
If I were to say just one thing about Adlerian therapy, it would be that it's highly practical. And I think that might be one of the reasons why so many contemporary theories have borrowed and stolen from Adler. often without even giving them any credit.
Right.
Adlerian therapy is also seen as a precursor to modern cognitive therapy. And one of the reasons for that is because of Adler's concept called the style of life or lifestyle. And that concept really is about how an individual develops beliefs about himself or herself, about others, and about the world. And that those beliefs guide the person as the person has to deal with different tasks of life. And so that's very similar to the cognitive perspective of the schema. And so that's one of the ways that Adler really was foreshadowing cognitive theory and therapy.
That's right. You know, Adlerian therapists are always very interested and very involved. They have an educational approach, which is oriented toward helping clients begin to understand what Adlerians call basic mistakes.
In the upcoming clip, one of the things that I'm doing is a family constellation interview. That's the main focus. And sometimes I worry a little bit in this session with Clayton that I stuck a little too close to the clipboard and missed some chances to interact with him a little bit more spontaneously. But I did notice that a lot of those birth order characteristics that Adler talked about so much come out in the session. And so let's watch.
Okay.
So Clayton, we don't know each other very well.
No.
No. So I want you to know anytime if you want to ask me anything about me, you can.
Okay.
You don't have to though.
Okay.
Okay? But I'm going to ask you quite a few questions
Okay.
about you
Okay.
and a little bit about your family.
All right.
And one of the things that I like to do to help me get to know you a little bit better is to draw a family tree. And so I'm going to do that now. And I know a little bit about your family. And so I'm going to start here. This is going to be your dad. Okay. He's going to be a big square. We're going to go over here, and then your mom is going to be a big circle. And you're the oldest?
Yeah.
All right. And you're going to be a square. And so we put Clayton here. And how old are you?
10.
10. And you have a brother, right?
Yeah.
And how old is he?
7.
He's 7. And what's his name?
Carter.
Carter. And your mom's name?
Sarah.
Sarah with no H, right?
No.
How old is she?
42, I think.
42. You think? I'll put a
Yeah.
question mark there because we're not sure. And then your dad's name?
Dave.
Dave. And how old is your dad?
I think 45.
Okay. But we'll put a question mark there because we're not exactly for sure. Okay. And that's it? Anybody else live in your house?
Pets.
Oh, you have some pets?
Yeah.
What do you have?
2 rabbits and a frog.
Whoa, I don't know if I can make very good rabbits, but here's a rabbit. Here's another rabbit. And I know I can't make a good frog, but it sounds like you have a lot of things that jump.
Yeah.
What are the rabbits' names?
Rex and Scaper.
Rex and Scaper.
Yeah.
And the frog?
I don't know his name. My brother never told me.
It's your brother's frog.
Yeah, and he never told me its name, so.
Okay.
He doesn't really tell anybody its name.
All right, so that's really who hangs out in your house for the most part.
Yeah.
And then if you go up, do you have some grandparents too?
Yeah.
So on your dad's side?
His mom's name was Donna.
Okay.
And I don't know his dad's name because I never met him, so. And then on my
mom's side. My grandma's, which is K.
Mhm.
And then my grandpa's name's Manny.
Manny?
Yeah.
Okay. And so if you were to just this whole scene, and do you have, you probably have some cousins too, don't you?
Yeah.
It's gonna get complicated. So where do we start?
I don't.
Your mom has brother and a sister, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so older or younger than her, do you know?
They're both younger.
So let's see, those two, we'll say one is a boy and one's a girl. Or,
Yeah.
And then they have kids?
My aunt doesn't, but my uncle does.
How many kids?
2.
So he's got 2 kids, and how old are they?
3 and 1.
So they're pretty young.
Yeah.
Boy, girl?
Yeah.
One of each?
Yeah.
Okay. So 3 and 1. And then on this side?
So my dad, I think he has 2 siblings with children, and or actually all 3 of his siblings have children.
Mm-hmm.
So one has 2 teenagers who are like 15 and 17.
Okay, so there's one that's 15 and one that's 17.
And then his other sister has one kid that's 9, I think.
So
Yeah, 9.
Somebody, boy or girl?
Boy.
Okay, so 9.
And then another one has one boy who I think he's around 5.
Okay.
So yeah.
So you've got 2 teenage cousins, a 9-year-old cousin, a 5-year-old cousin, a 3-year-old cousin, and a 1-year-old cousin.
Yeah.
Okay. Out of all these people, including your aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, parents, and brother, who would you say you're closest to? Who do you hang out with the most?
Well, if you call fighting hanging out, my brother.
So you guys fight a little bit. We'll put a little squiggly line in here, kind of meaning that sometimes you guys fight.
Yeah. Probably my mom or dad.
Mm-hmm. So both, pretty close to your mom, pretty close to your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then who would you say, I was going to ask, who do you fight with the most?
My brother for sure.
Yeah. So we'll put a little fighting there. And then who do you think is the best athlete? Who's the best sporty person in all these people?
Either me or one of my cousins, one of the teenage cousins.
So you're pretty sporty, and maybe somebody over here too.
Yeah.
Who is the best at music?
I don't know.
You don't know? Who's the best at art and like drawing and artsy things?
Probably Donna.
Mm-hmm. So she's kind of artsy.
Yeah.
Put that down, artsy. Who's the most angry?
Like who's mad a lot?
Yeah, who gets mad a lot?
My brother.
You think your brother gets mad a lot?
Yeah, for sure.
Who gets in trouble the most?
My brother, yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Okay. If you had 3 words that you could use to describe your dad, what words would you use?
Gone.
Gone?
Yeah, like he's uptown. busy. And I don't know really the third one.
That's okay. You got 2. Gone and busy.
Yeah.
And 3 words to describe your mom.
School.
What was that?
She's in school a
School.
lot.
She's in school. I thought you said scroll.
She's also busy with homework.
So she's busy.
And I'd say that she's kind of slow at times. Like, sometimes it takes her a while to figure something out.
So she's a little slow.
Yeah.
Takes her a while to figure things out. Now, how about your brother? 3 words to describe your brother.
Noisy.
Okay.
Tattletales.
Tattletale.
Likes baseball. He likes baseball.
Okay. Okay. And then the hardest one of all, 3 words to describe Clayton.
I like football and hockey. And I enjoy eating.
You really like to eat, huh?
Yeah.
I should have brought some snacks. What's your favorite thing to have a snack? For a snack, like, what do you like to eat? Just everything.
Yeah. I don't get a lot of very like sugary food because my mom doesn't really ever buy it, but yeah.
Yeah, can't think of a favorite right now.
No.
If you were to say, well, what are the, like your parents try to teach you things, what would you say are the lessons that they try to teach you? What do they try to teach you? What are their family values, the things that they believe in?
Probably not being loud at other people's houses, like when their parents are trying to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Or, yeah. And just like polite, I guess.
Be polite?
Yeah.
So like don't bug other people in their houses when they don't want you?
Yeah.
And be polite?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that your parents really believe in?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Those are the main ones. If you think of some later, that's fine. One thing I just think of when I see all this is that other than Taylor, you're kind of I guess your brother is kind of close to your age, but you're the only one who's 10 right now.
Yeah.
In fact, nobody's really very close. And Taylor, though, he's close to you, but he lives in Great Falls.
Yeah.
Do you and Taylor get along okay?
Yeah. He's only a couple of months younger than me.
Oh, so you guys play together okay?
Yeah.
Get along. And it sounds like you and your brother are close, but you have some tension sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he's noisy and he's a tattletale and he's mad a lot.
Yeah.
He's in trouble a lot. It's a lot of pressure for an older brother to have a younger brother like that.
I have to babysit him sometimes.
Really?
And my cousins were 3 and 1.
How does that go?
Not so well.
Really, what usually happens?
Just a lot of stress because they all have a lot of energy. And yeah.
That's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
And especially, a 1-year-old, I suppose, although the 1-year-old's maybe walking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She can't even talk, so that makes it even harder.
So she's probably really hard to keep track of. And then the 3-year-old's probably, and then your brother, oof.
Yeah.
You have a lot. And you like to play football and hockey and eat. And I'll bet you having a little brother and little cousins kind of interferes with that sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever been in a bad mood?
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
What do people do when you're in a bad mood? Or what do you do when you're in a bad mood? What do you look like? What do you act like?
Not so well.
No?
Yeah.
Like what? If I was watching, what did I see? Would you like be stomping around? Would you
I'd probably be yelling.
yelling?
Yeah.
Like what? What do you yell?
Depends on what I'm mad about.
Do you yell at your brother?
Well, it kind of depends on what I'm mad about. Like if it's him, I do yell at him. But sometimes, a lot of the time, it's my mom or brother. Because, yeah.
So you might be. If I were watching you and you were in a bad mood, I might see you yelling at your mom or yelling at your brother.
Yeah.
Or just yelling about something that you're mad about.
Yeah. Not really my dad, because he's usually out of town.
He's out of town a lot, so you don't yell at him.
No.
He's not around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make it harder too, I guess, to be the oldest person, the oldest kid in the family, and then your dad's not even home?
Yeah.
What's that like?
Kind of hard, because my brother, he's brags, like he thinks he's just as good as, he thinks he acts like just like a 11-year-old, and those friends are really kind of annoying. And yeah, he's just, it's on my nerve about 90% of the time. So
Yeah. So I'll bet he likes two things. I bet he likes your attention and as much of it as he can get. And I'll bet the other thing he likes is to get you in trouble.
yeah, he likes that a lot.
Yeah. So that's tricky. So I have some ideas of what might work.
Yeah.
Because I'm betting that the same old thing all the time is going to stop working.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know, there's a famous guy who worked a lot with rats. Now, I don't want to say that your brother's a rat.
He acts like one.
But do you know what the famous guy thought?
What?
That punishment, you know what punishment is?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like if you do something I don't like, right? Let's say you're messing up your hair and I go, knock it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop messing up your hair. Stop it. So what do you want to do?
Keep doing it?
Yeah. A lot of times what he said was that punishment, when you punish someone, it just doesn't work very well. Because usually, hold out your hand. If I push you, what do you want to do?
Push you
You
back.
want to push back, right? Pretty soon we're just pushing, and I'm saying, stop that. And you're saying, I'll do it if I want to, right? So he said, punishment, not effective. Rita, as we watch this session, and we're in the middle at this point, I kind of find myself a little bit struck by how powerful the firstborn birth order dynamic seems to be affecting Clayton in his life. And of course, the family constellation method that I use to sort of uncover that is just one method. There are other methods like earliest recollections, which it can be a little harder to do with a 10-year-old.
Right. You know, and I noticed that you were using an educational approach. In fact, I think our friend B.F. Skinner may have actually been invited into the room.
Now, I never actually said the word Skinner, but my justification for that is that both Adler and Skinner would agree that punishment is generally an ineffective strategy, both in families and in life.
In this next clip, you say something paradoxical, kind of, that people can watch for.
Right, and I also try my best to keep Clayton awake and engaged.
which can be challenging. So let's watch and see if that worked.
But I don't know where I'd get the money.
It's true. It's probably pretty expensive to send a 7-year-old to a hot place in Africa.
Yeah, at least I would have to pay for a round trip.
That's right.
So
I can't help but wonder, though, if thinking your brother is annoying, if that's helpful or not helpful.
I don't know.
Because I wonder if you think.
I don't know.
I don't know. You're tough.
Yes.
Do you ever play any games? I'm going to do one with you now, even though it's going to get us out of the camera a little bit. But I have this game that I play sometimes.
Okay.
You ready? Okay. So we're going to try this stand up. We're going to stand up. Okay. And then, yeah, you should stand just like that and put your toes toward my toes. Stand up pretty straight. So this is called the hand pushing game. You ever done it?
Yeah.
Have you? But you don't just touch my hands. You stay like this, okay? And then you go like that. And then whoever loses his balance first loses.
Okay.
Okay, you ready? All right, are you ready?
Yeah.
You're pretty good. I usually.
I'm using the chair.
Oh, you are? Stand away, stand back. Uh-oh. All right, you're all right. Now, okay. Now I can win. All right, did you move your foot?
Yes.
Yes, I got you. Okay, you ready? Round two. Oh, that's, I gotta tell you, one rule is you can't hit people in the chest or anything. Okay, so now you know that. I mean, I can go like that and just push you. Oops. You okay? Yeah. Oh. All right, that's two. One more? Okay. It's a little bit like your brother, right?
A tiny bit.
How is it like him?
Probably the shoving.
I guess I'm the champion.
Yeah.
So how do you think I won?
Because you're bigger.
It does help
Yeah.
when you weigh more.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why probably whenever you try to go up against your dad or your mom, you kind of lose.
If my mom tries to move my arm in certain directions, she can't do it. But other than that, she can get me.
Can't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know what? I like to, the trick of the game. So stick your hands out so we can do this sitting down. So you can almost always win. And if you do this with your brother, I guarantee that you will win. Okay. Do you know why? But not just because of size, but because of, do you know what the word strategy means?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you're playing football or you're playing hockey and you fake somebody out. Have you done that before?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you act like you're going one direction and you go the other direction, fake them out. So here's the deal. One of the things that makes brothers annoying is a thing called revenge. You know what revenge is?
Yeah.
So if you do this, okay, you start the game, you say, hey, Carter, you want to play a game I learned? Okay. And then you go like this, go really fast, like slap him in the hands. And you know what he's going to want to do?
Give me back.
Exactly. And so then what do?
Dodge it.
You just dodge it and he falls over. Just like you did that one time, right? And so it's sort of a trick. And that's exactly, I think, what's going on with you and Carter is that he annoys you, right? He goes like this. Is that annoying? Huh?
Okay.
And then what do?
I'll get him back.
Yes, you want to get him back. But the problem is he wants you to get him back. You are
Older.
Sort of.
So John, in that last session, I noticed that you used the hand pushing technique, which was interesting. It's not necessarily Adlerian.
Right, it's not. It's really, I really was wanting to keep Clayton awake and engaged and involved. And I do think that Adlerian theory is very open to using all kinds of different strategies to help people glimpse different ways of acting and thinking in life. And so, yes, I use that, and I like it. I feel like it's a fairly useful strategy with kids.
Well, you're right. And Adlerian therapists often use very provocative and interesting interventions. Sometimes they name them sort of provocative names like spitting in the soup.
Right, which is a little bit gross. So let's not talk about that anymore. But instead, I would say that the Adlerian use of those provocative techniques is designed to enhance insight, which Adler believed then insight would enhance motivation toward positive changes.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to note that Adlerians will often involve the parent or the caretaker of a child when you're working with a child Clayton's age.
Right, and another shout out or positive thing about Adlerian approaches is that the Adlerians were really some of the first to emphasize doing parent
That was weird. I got cut off, but I think he did a very good job talking about the genogram and how the genogram impacts one's life. So he focused on the parents and their relationship, the extended family and all of that, and how it affects the child. He also talked about paradoxical views and how trying to get him back actually propels more of that behavior and things of that nature. Now, I'm going to go back into the slides to finish up with the lecture, but we're going to do an evaluation of Adlerian therapy. And here we go. So the question becomes, his influence was powerful, but are his techniques useful? Well, research suggests similar efficacy between psychoanalytic therapy and PCTs. We see play therapy in an Adlerian model reduces disruption in the classroom, We see social interest reduces psychiatric symptoms and so forth. So there is good evidence here. Now, Adler was one of the first modern theorists and practitioners to emphasize social and family dynamics. So socioeconomic status could impact one's identity and how they relate to the world. Talking about social justice and promoting equity is deeply woven into the theory. And then feminism, we're talking about him embracing feminism in the early 1900s when it was more controversial. Now, Adler also talked about spirituality, and due to a lot of the existential things we talked about earlier. But so it's been open to spirituality, social interest, things like loving your neighbor as yourself or golden rule, right? These are part of religious beliefs, but could be used by Adler. Now, I want to conclude similar to what I said earlier in the lecture, which is Ellis referred to Adler as the true father of modern psychotherapy. He did not give Freud that credit. Now, we don't do that. We actually give Freud the credit. But what was Ellis talking about, right? He felt that there are so many ideas that Adler introduced that all these other approaches borrowed from is incredible. So that in a nutshell is our lecture. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll keep it moving on our next one.